Hey guys, Drifter here. Welcome to another Warzone commentary where today we're going to talk about a serious issue with silly gameplay in the background. I wanted to talk about the coronavirus protests again and why maybe, just maybe, they're actually a good thing and maybe the people protesting aren't quite so crazy. I've got my favorite conspiracy theory shirt on today, picked it up from the Commenticate store. I get a lot of looks when I go out with this one, and a lot of you have asked why my hair always looks crazy or I look sweaty in videos, and the answer to that is I work out every single morning in quarantine. I wake up, I eat a light breakfast, and then I'm on about an hour to an hour and a half of workout, various like calisthenics, body weight, and or running. And so far that's actually worked out really well for me. I'm down 30 pounds overall. I'm a lot more fit and about halfway to my OnlyFans goal. When I get a six pack, we'll definitely have some OnlyFans going on. But let's get, away from the silliness now and talk about a more serious topic, which is the coronavirus protests and protesters. In the very recent past, I've had some, we'll say, colorful opinions about this group of people, complaining about it being a Chinese hoax or a government conspiracy, or that 5G causes coronaviruses, that Huawei invented it, that maybe we should let natural selection run its course, or one of the ones that I find the most humorous is that this is akin to slavery. Being stuck at home is just as bad as slavery. Anti-vax stuff, I don't think a whole lot of. And these are all fringe beliefs. They're very fringe beliefs, as a matter of fact, and the people spouting them tend to be very entertaining to watch. And that's probably the main reason that they get so much attention on these coronavirus protests, is just that they're very entertaining to watch. I watch like All Gas No Breaks and a bunch of these channels where they go to the rallies, and it's kind of hilarious. And I don't think it's so much a globalist or media propaganda agenda to make a certain group of people look bad. It's just that I'm going to watch a lot more of these nuts than I will any serious person protesting. We're going to talk about the serious people very shortly, because there are some aspects of these protests that are getting swept under the rug because everybody wants to make anti-vax and 5G jokes. And there are also important issues that nobody seems to be protesting or making a big deal out of that I think that we should all be very, very mad about. In no uncertain terms, we as US citizens just got screwed. We got screwed first by the Chinese government and then passed on over to our own government to take a turn, just like some weird three-way porn on Pornhub. We got screwed in a lot of different ways, and it was all bad. It was a very bad kind of screwing. Firstly, China suppressed the information about the virus as long as possible to give them time to either save face or try to save their own economy before it became devastating, whereas they could have helped, the rest of the world. And then our own government here in the United States bungled almost any kind of response that would have been appropriate, reasonable, or helpful. And that's the one I really want to focus on the most, because I know the most about it, and there's really not much I can do about China for that matter. In the United States, we resisted any extreme measures early on because it would be disruptive to our way of life, because it would destroy our economy, and as a consequence, the disease spread rapidly here in the United States, infected a bunch of people, and a lot of lives have been lost. But now that the damage is already done, it's lockdown time. It's lockdown time now. I mean, the lockdowns in every state are helping. I am pro-lockdown and pro-quarantine because it's going to slow the spread of corona and, break the infection chain and flatten the curve and all those good words that I'm sure you've heard about. That's real and that's true. But why not do these quarantines and lockdowns when it would have had a much bigger impact, like, let's say, January or February? Why not do our quarantine in the very beginning of the quarantine and cut cases by like 90% of what they are now? Because you're breaking off those initial infections and initial chains. And the answer is probably because the powers that be in every single state from every political spectrum that we have here all chose economic stability over individual lives. Until those individual lives started adding up and becoming very big, significant numbers, then they chose the lives over the stability when it was too late. And aside from any moral debate on this, because I know that not a lot of people share my values, there are a lot of people that do value their money and their economy more than their own or anybody else's lives. Let's just say that even if I 1,000,000% agreed with you, I think that both of us could agree that the response to this was botched and we almost got the worst of both worlds. Then you have to take a look at the massive economic impacts of state quarantines. This is already the biggest global recession/depression in history, at least that I can think of off the top of my head. We are, as of the time of recording this video, approaching 35 million new jobless claims, which is 35 million job losses in the United States. And this is brutal. This is like 100 or 1,000 times more than normal. This is the biggest recorded job loss in history. As a matter of fact, it's so big you could take all of the other job losses in history and put them together, and they probably wouldn't add up to a number like this one. It is mind-boggling how many jobs have been lost or downsized or minimized, and this is going to hurt our economy for decades to come. And what's crazy is that 35 million job losses is about 10% of the total population. And by total population, I mean total population of the United States, not our total workforce. For those of you that don't know, we don't count our employment rate as people with jobs divided by total citizens. There's a lot of children that can't work, elderly, people that are disabled. There are people that are stay-at-home moms or dads and not looking for jobs, or chronically unemployed that have just kind of given up. And we don't count those primarily to make like our unemployment rates look better. But we have 10% of the total population, not 10% of the workforce. If you look at like what percentage of the workforce lost its job, I wouldn't be surprised if it were somewhere around 20 to 30%, which is just terrifying. Our economy is retracting, small businesses are closing, even big businesses are failing or filing for bankruptcy. And this is a massive destruction of wealth on a scale that we have never seen in our lifetimes, and outside of a global war are not likely to see again. And some people are willing to risk their lives to stave off this economic loss. Sadly, in doing so, they risk everyone else's lives too, instead of just their own. If it were just their own, I would tell them it's totally okay for you to go out there and YOLO it and work as hard and as dangerous if you want to, if you think it's worth the money. But they can bring it home, they can spread it around, they can infect innocent people, which means that they probably shouldn't be working for the safety of everybody. But that leads me to my next point. If people shouldn't be working and our economy can't function like normal, then there is a responsibility of the federal and state governments to do something about it. That's why we spend so much money on these organizations. And the bailout response, at least for individuals and small businesses, has been pathetic. I want to say that again. It is sad. It is pathetic and just depressing as an American. If I'm not mistaken, the stimulus checks or deposits are about $1,200 to $1,400 per person. And that is a tiny, it may seem like a lot of money. Yeah, like getting $1,200 a month or getting $1,200 in cash sounds good, but that might cover 1 month of rent in a city like Atlanta, Georgia, but it might not cover 1 week of rent in San Francisco. It might cover 2 months of rent in some rural area in the United States where there's not a lot of demand for property. But getting a free $1,200 or $1,400 or whatever it is, it just doesn't go very far for most Americans, because our cost of living right now is very high. It's been high for decades, and this is making it very, very noticeable. Small businesses are getting some loans too. There's the Payment Protection Program, which I did apply for to try to get for my own little small business here. But the money ran out. There was just not enough money. Very few of the small businesses that I know that applied for this actually got it. There were states that had to fight super hard to get extra funding for nurses or doctors or EMTs or any of the first responder healthcare workers, because they're underfunded, and nurses and doctors are just quitting because they don't want to deal with this, because they don't want to risk their lives, because they don't want to work the hours. There are people trying to stiff them on overtime hours. And they're getting stiffed by the government because the government doesn't believe they should get paid either. Essential workers get stuck probably worse than anybody else, because a lot of essential workers, respectfully to your jobs, you're working close to minimum wage or slightly above it. A lot of service industry kind of jobs. And these are jobs that were previously annoying or boring or tedious, or you had to deal with a bunch of Karens. But now you get all of that, plus the constant danger of infection, because the most risk-taking people are going to be the ones going to the stores. And you're working this job for very low pay, which I think is you getting screwed. But man, did these big companies ever make out like bandits. The giant corporations have done very, very well in time of Corona. Some of them, mind you, a few went out, but they got massive bailout funds from the government. And these funds were supposed to either, pay their rent and keep them afloat until this passes, or to pay employees to keep the employees paid and keep the economy going. But a not insignificant portion of it got turned into bonuses for the bosses and furloughs for everybody else. And there doesn't appear to be a whole lot of oversight on this process, if not any at all, because members of our federal government that I'm not going to name because it's going to get all triggery in the comments, decided to minimize oversight on the bailout money. So we as citizens, as individuals who pay the majority of the taxes in this country, got almost nothing in the way of relief from the government. We got a Band-Aid. We got a couple of weeks. We got a here you won't starve for a little bit kind of money. We didn't even get relief for people that can't pay their rent or mortgage because they can't work. And, there's people that want to propose laws to forgive all that, but that screws over property owners that are also running businesses that depend on that revenue. So the real way to do that would be to have like a government stimulus program that pays people's rent directly to the property owners, in my opinion. We got none of that. And with people losing their jobs at such an accelerated rate, that means they can't afford insurance, which means no health care when you get sick, or in most cases, they'll still treat you, but you'll get a worse tier of health care, and then a lifelong obligation of debt in the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. So most people don't want to live their whole lives in debt, and they'll just kind of YOLO at home in order to avoid that bill, and they might die from corona. I've been sitting here complaining about what our government isn't doing, and there is a good argument that doing all of these kind of things is expensive. I won't deny that. I won't begrudge you that if you're part of that group of people that doesn't like Social Security and social welfare and stuff like that. I totally understand those arguments. And I would say that if we were a different country with a smaller GDP, with a tighter budget, with less room for potential growth, I would say, no, we shouldn't do these things. We can't do these things. We can't afford these things. But we're the United States of America. We are daddy's credit card for the world. We have the money. We have all the money. We have a massive GDP. We have a very wealthy, robust, vibrant, growing economy, a stable currency, surprisingly. We have ludicrous tax revenues to the federal government, primarily from individuals, since giant corporations don't like to pay taxes and apparently don't have to anymore. But the tax revenues are going to the government. The government has $1 trillion plus some number of trillions to spend every single year. And for decades, what we in the United States spend on our military budget and Social Security style programs are bigger than most national economies. And I want to say that again, if you were to just throw a dart and let it hit any country on the map, you could take the size of their entire economy, and we probably spend that in a year on either Social Security or military. Those are our two biggest expenditures. And we've been doing this for decades and haven't gone broke, and we still have good credit and we still have good money. Our government gets and spends money in amounts that would make Jeff Bezos sick. That we have a nearly unlimited pool of money to spend from. So why is it that after we've put up with government waste and like bloated military budgets and poorly managed Social Security programs and all this kind of stuff for decades, we've been paying through the nose with our income taxes for ages on this. And when it really hits the fan and we really actually need the federal government to step in and give us back some of that money that we've spent to really kind of help us through these hard times, all of a sudden we get like, here, hey kid, here's a quarter for your phone call, and then give the business $100. That's kind of how this is going. The individuals are getting screwed here. And I think that the average American got 100% screwed on this bailout deal. I mean, as Americans, we have to deal with job losses, healthcare losses, the pittance of a stimulus. Our investments have evaporated. We can't leave our home even, which you can't even, you're getting all stir crazy and irritable, and getting food that you don't cook yourself has a massive delivery fee now. And all the while, the giant corporations and speculators and investors are making bank. And this is what people should be protesting. This is what people should be pissed off about. There should be people mad enough about the injustice of this system to protest despite the risk of corona. There should be people demanding greater accountability. There should be people demanding oversight. Transparency. We should be demanding that our government fund us as individuals instead of just subsidizing their friends in these giant companies and whoever knows the representative or whatever. We should be super pissed off that our nurses and doctors and EMTs out there busting their butts 24/7 in some cases. Some doctors, they're up 24 hours. They don't sleep. It's a super unhealthy work-life balance. It's dangerous. And they're not getting paid crap. In some cases, hospitals are cutting staff and firing more of them because coronavirus patients just don't make enough money and they don't have enough money to pay these people. We should be pissed off about this. We should be protesting this. I think that every level of our state and federal governments, along with a not insignificant portion of the actual representatives, have failed us, and they failed us miserably. We should be out in the streets rioting about the ineptitude of the leadership in this country. And I think that some people are. I think that when you look at some of these protest groups, there are people like the ones I described out there that do fall in this category. They're mad that Amazon got money and they got almost nothing. They're mad that the economy got destroyed after it was too late to save it to begin with. They're mad that they're in lockdown now instead of before. They're mad for a whole ton of reasons, but they just don't get any airtime because they're not as fun to talk to as the guy who complains about Corona 5G towers and aliens and government conspiracies. That guy's hilarious. That guy's lighthearted. I could watch, 10 minutes of him ramble about something and tell some jokes on it and put some little ads on it. People would click it. But if you want to interview somebody who's really serious about criticizing the problems that we have and being serious about how much everybody's getting screwed, all of a sudden that's not fun. I don't want to watch that. I don't want to be reminded of how screwed I am. I'm not going to be clicking any ads on this because it reminds me of the money I don't have, and then there's no reason to make content on it. As such, some of the protesters are probably doing the right thing, but they're just not getting any attention because they're getting covered up by morons. And there's plenty of morons out there. Morons out there, you keep doing your thing too, I guess. It's entertaining for me, but it's not helpful for the nation. And that was the big one for today, to talk about the real problems that we should be protesting. But one thing I did at least want to briefly talk about is the constitutionality of a lockdown. There are right now many arguments being made that the government has no right to restrict our freedoms, which in this case would be freedom of travel, association, freedom of speech, which is that's more corporate on this point than legal, like YouTube and Twitter and stuff shutting that down, which is a weird gray area that we covered in an entirely different video. They're, going to be demanding vaccines that we put into our bodies, etc., etc. And these arguments do have some merit. Now, all of my understanding of constitutional law and precedents and the cases that I read indicate that these particular freedoms can legally be restricted during times of martial law, natural disasters, or public pandemics, which is another type of natural disaster. The Supreme Court has ruled in favor of a great number of freedom restrictions and forced actions over time, ranging from vaccines to lockdowns, as long as they prevent pandemics and are in the benefit of the public health and public safety. But that being said, a different court in a different era, with different judges, reading a different law that had different requirements against a constitution that has probably been amended and changed over time, might rule differently. And the arguments of the other side, from a pure legal standpoint, I want to make this clear with you guys that I am pro-lockdown and pro-quarantine. I think that's the right path. But it would be intellectually dishonest of me to sit here and say that there is absolutely no merit to this. Just because I don't support it and I don't like it means it's not real. No, there is real merit, and there are real, good arguments that can be made here, especially from a pure constructual legal perspective that doesn't really consider public safety, but just a true constitutionalist restrictive view of the government. There are good arguments to be made, and I think that we should at least think about that before dismissing them, because it's not impossible that after Corona's done, that our federal or state governments might try similar things, but for, instead of actually good reasons, something petty, something controlling, something political, and try to pass it off as a more serious good reason like Corona, thus creating very bad precedents, and destroying our freedom. So that's something to think about as well. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. And hopefully we'll do some more positive stuff. I've been trying to make more positive content and not talk about Corona too much. I'll see you next time. Drifter out.